Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Maybe because she wasn't at the table at all. She was crouched 500 yards downrange, swapping out battered silhouettes when she heard raised voices from the firing line. It wasn't her business. It was never her business. She swept brass, changed targets, and stayed invisible. That's how she survived mornings like this, hidden in plain sight. But something in the sharpness of their voices caught her. Navy SEALs, training hard, precision rifles slicing air. All but one, young, eager, unraveling. His shots scattered like buckshot. He blamed the rifle. She knew better. Even from here she could see it, the twitch of his trigger finger, the rigid shoulders. She whispered to no one, breathe, relax, follow through. But then he said it, this thing's messed up. And without thinking, her voice cut through the morning air. The rifle's fine, you're pulling left. Silence struck like a round through glass. Every head turned. A 23-year-old part-time range girl had just corrected a SEAL. She almost wished she could take it back, almost. But then Jake, their team leader, stepped forward, calm, curious. You think you can do better, not a challenge, a measure. And when she nodded, his eyes sharpened. He handed her the rifle. The world held its breath. Her heart pounded, but her hand stayed still. Her father's voice, Gunny Martinez, echoed in her skull, patience, precision, control under pressure. She lay prone, adjusted posture, felt the crosshairs steady. The wind whispered against her cheek. Exhale, pause, press, crack, then again crack, crack. Steel rang downrange like a slow heartbeat. She lifted her head, 3 perfect holes kissing center mass. When she looked back, their faces weren't mocking anymore. They were quiet, respectful, even wary. Jake just said 3 shots, 2-inch group, dead center. The morning had changed shape. And Sarah, for the first time, wasn't invisible anymore. She didn't sleep that night. Her hands still trembled from the shot, her mind replaying every second. She told herself it didn't matter. She was just the girl who swept brass. She wasn't supposed to be seen. But the next morning, Jake found her by the target shed. He didn't lecture. He just asked, "Want to sit in on training?" She almost laughed. But he was serious. And a week later, there she was, silent, notebook in hand, watching SEAL team work through advanced long-range drills. Not a student, not a teacher, just present. Ignored her at first, pride still raw. But on the 3rd day, without looking at her, he muttered, "What's wrong with my form?" She told him, elbow too tight, grip too tense. He adjusted, fired, dead center. He didn't smile, didn't thank her, just nodded once. In their world, that was enough. Respect didn't come with applause. It came in silence and an unspoken invitation to stay. Over weeks, she became part of the background, but different now. Not invisible, just quiet. When she spoke, it mattered, and Jake noticed. One evening, while breaking down rifles, he said, "You ever think about qualifying? You're already sharper than most instructors." She hesitated. "I'm not military." He just smiled. "Neither were half of us before we joined." Then softer, "Talent wasted is a crime." The words landed like weight on her ribs. Because part of her had always wondered if she was wasting something. Something her father had carved into her bones. 2 weeks later, she stood at the edge of an instructor assessment, clipboard in hand, just observing. That was all she was supposed to do, but then everything shifted. A visiting contractor, cocky, grinning, mounted a new adaptive optic on Jake's black Talon rifle. The rifle no one touched but instructors. He bragged about hitting a moving target at 1,000 yards. Sarah frowned. The scope wasn't calibrated. Mirage waves shimmered like heat ghosts above the earth. He fired, missed, fired again. Miss Commander Harrison, the co, grew visibly irritated, and then the contractor sneered, "Let the range girl try." The air turned to stone. Sarah felt every eye sliced toward her. She almost said no, almost stayed the girl who stayed quiet, but Jake's voice cut through. "With your permission, sir." Harrison turned. "Are you willing?" Her voice didn't shake. "Yes, sir." She dropped prone. The black Talon felt heavier than it should, not in weight, in reputation. Mirage danced, wind curled across the field. She ignored the optic's smart rangefinder, dialed by instinct, her father's voice in her ear and her own beside it. "Breathe, relax, follow through." The target swung, crack, a perfect center hit. The clang rolled back like distant thunder. Silence. Then Jake whispered, "That's my girl." Harrison said nothing at first, just studying her. "Then, if you ever decide nursing isn't your path, I know people who'd train you." Sarah didn't answer. Couldn't. because part of her wasn't sure which path she was already on. She drove home under a bleeding orange sky, the smell of cordite still clinging to her skin. She sat in her car outside her tiny apartment for a long time, fingers curled around the steering wheel, trying to breathe. She'd spent years in the background, building walls around herself, telling the world she didn't want in. But tonight something cracked. She couldn't stop hearing Jake's words, talent wasted is a crime. Maybe it was. Maybe hiding wasn't humility. Maybe it was fear. Her father had taught her to be precise, but he'd never taught her to step forward. She wondered if he even believed she could. The next morning she found herself at the range before dawn, long before the SEALs arrived. She set up targets in silence, then stayed, firing alone methodically, hour after hour, drilling fundamentals until her arms ached and her breath came ragged. Not to impress anyone, just to know when the moment came again, she would be ready. That quiet decision, made alone in the gray light, changed her more than the shot ever had. Weeks blurred. She became a fixture during training, still quiet but not invisible now. They began asking for her feedback, not just on form but on mindset, on staying calm under pressure. She didn't tell them how her hands sometimes still shook after each perfect shot, how the fear never left, she just stopped listening to it. Once dismissive, now mirrored her drills. The older SEAL would sometimes watch her with a small smile, like seeing something he hadn't expected. And Jake stopped looking at her like an outsider. He started looking at her like one of them. It scared her how much she wanted that, to belong, to matter beyond being her father's daughter. Yet every night she lay awake, torn between two lives, the safe, known path of nursing and this shadowed road paved in discipline, risk, and silence. One carved wounds, the other healed them. Could she be both? Or would choosing one mean betraying the other? One storm-lashed morning, a message came down from command, evaluation week. Real scenarios, live stress. Jake found her cleaning brass alone and asked simply, "You in?" Her throat went dry. This was beyond observation, beyond theory, but she nodded. And that week they pushed her. Wind calls under shifting weather, timed shots under fatigue. Coordinated fire while instructors barked pressure into her ear. She stumbled, missed, regrouped, pushed harder. By the third day, something inside her settled. Not cocky, just calm. Like her father had said, control under pressure. By the final test, her world had narrowed to the reticle, her heartbeat, the wind against her cheek. And when her last shot hit dead center under time, no one clapped. But every man on that line looked at her like she'd always belonged there. That night the range was empty, the world hushed. She sat alone on a bench, the ocean wind biting at her face, stars spilling over the dark horizon. Jake approached quietly, hands in his pockets. "You good?" She nodded, just thinking. She hesitated, then said it out loud for the first time. "I've always been in the background, watching, cleaning, supporting, but I think I'm done hiding behind my father's shadow. I want to earn my own." Jake's voice was soft. "You already have." Then he handed her something. A small patch, dark gray, stitched with a subdued trident, not official, not issued, just symbolic. "Had it made, said it's for your rifle bag, you showed up when it counted." She stared at it, throat tight. "Thank you," she whispered. The next morning, Sarah clipped the patch to her bag. She walked the path down to the line as sunlight bled over the cliffs. The world felt the same, but she was. She wasn't just the girl who swept brass and stayed invisible. She was the one they called when precision mattered, when silence wasn't fear, but focus. And as she shouldered her rifle, she realized something quiet but unshakable. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why had she said yes? That thought stalked her all night, even as she lay in the half-dark of her tiny apartment, ceiling fans spinning shadows across cracked plaster. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it again. The way the rifle stock had settled into her shoulder like it belonged there. The way her world had narrowed down to one breath, one heartbeat, one whisper of wind. And then the sound of the shot cracking like lightning across the range. 3 perfect holes, center mass. And then silence, not stunned, not mocking, just different. She remembered their faces, the doubt gone, the quiet, assessing respect that had replaced it. She had walked back to the office afterward, numb, clutching her gear bag like a shield. Pretended nothing had changed. Pretended she hadn't just stepped across an invisible line she hadn't even known existed. But alone in her car that night, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles hurt, she knew something had changed. And there was no going back. Her phone buzzed just past midnight. Unknown number. One message: be at the range tomorrow, 700, bring a notebook. She stared at it. Her stomach lurched. She almost typed back no. She almost said, I'm just a student, this isn't my world. Instead, she closed the phone and sat in silence until the sun began to bleed through the blinds. The morning smelled like salt and diesel. Sarah stood at the edge of the firing field in her range vest, visitor badge clipped to her belt, hands locked behind her back to keep them from fidgeting. It was barely 700, but the SEALs were already in motion. Black SUVs lined the gravel lot, and rows of matte gray rifles gleamed like sleeping predators on the benches. No one greeted her, no one acknowledged her at all. It wasn't unkindness, it was protocol. Walked past with his rifle slung low and jaw tight, eyes forward. Not even a glance. Older, grizzled, quiet, nodded once as he passed, like he was nodding to himself. The rest just flowed around her like she was furniture, and somehow that was worse than mockery. Jake stood by the far table watching the team like a conductor tracking an orchestra. He wore dark glasses, expression unreadable. When his gaze finally touched hers, he didn't smile, just a small nod. Permission granted. She stayed off the line, notebook open, pen ready. And then they began. The first shock was the speed. Drills unfolded like clockwork, movements razor precise, communication minimal. Everything they did was stripped of excess, as if each man had burned away hesitation through repetition until nothing was left but instinct. Sarah's eyes darted between them, the way shoulders shifted under recoil, the subtle micro-corrections as they broke shots. Her mind cataloged everything, muscle memory flaring from years of her father's weekend lessons. It was like watching a language she half spoke, but had never heard sung this fluently. Struggled, not obviously, just small slips, a breath mistimed, an elbow collapsing inward, his support hand rigid instead of loose. She wrote it down, forcing herself not to speak. She wasn't here to teach. She wasn't even here, not really. Hours passed like minutes. The smell of gunpowder clung to her hair, the air vibrating with the staccato heartbeat of suppressed rifles. No one spoke to her. No one asked her opinion. And yet she felt eyes flicker her way sometimes, fleeting, testing. On the third day it happened. She was walking behind the benches, head down, when a voice cut the air. "Hey, Martinez." She froze, hadn't looked up from his scope. His tone wasn't mocking this time, just quiet, tired. "You see anything wrong with this form?" She hesitated. Her instincts screamed to stay silent, but the angle of his wrist made her wince. She stepped closer, crouching without thinking. "Elbows too tight," she murmured. "Support hands clenched. You're fighting the rifle, just rest it. Let it breathe." Said nothing, he just adjusted, exhaled, fired. The spotter called dead center. Lifted his head, met her eyes, and gave a single short nod. Then went back to work. That was it. No applause, no jokes. Just the smallest, silent acceptance. It landed heavier than any praise could have. Over the next weeks, she became part of the landscape. Never loud, never trying, just there. When someone's shot group wandered, sometimes a voice would float out behind them. "Your support elbows collapsing. Relax your jaw, you're clenching. Let your breath go, you're holding tension." The first few times they ignored her. The next few they listened. By the end of the second month they sought her out, quietly, casually, like asking the time. Jake noticed. One late afternoon, the wind coming hard off the ocean and the benches slick with salt spray, he found her breaking down a rifle alone. The others had gone. The range was silent except for the dry clicks of her cleaning rod. "You ever think about qualifying?" he asked. She blinked up at him. "What?" "You're already sharper than most of our instructors on trigger discipline and wind calls. You've got the eyes for it." "I'm not military," she said automatically. Jake smiled faintly. "Neither were half of us before we joined." Then his expression softened, voice low, almost lost in the wind. "Talent wasted is a crime, Martinez." She stared at the rifle in her hands. It felt heavier than it had a moment ago. That night she drove home through misted coastal dark, headlights carving tunnels through the fog. Her father's voice echoed in her skull, control under pressure, patience, precision. But he had never said what to do when someone finally saw her. He had never prepared her for this. She sat at her kitchen table until dawn, surrounded by open textbooks and ignored notes, the smell of cleaning solvent still in her clothes. She was supposed to be studying anatomy. Instead, she kept replaying Jake's words. "Talent wasted is a crime." Her whole life, she told herself shooting was just a skill, like changing tires or sharpening knives, useful but not her. Nursing was supposed to be her path. She wanted to heal, to fix. But part of her wondered if she only wanted that because it was safe. And part of her, the part that had breathed out and broken 3 perfect shots under the weight of 8 SEALs starring, wanted more. The next morning, she got to the range an hour early. No one was there, not yet. The world was gray and damp, the air sharp with salt. She set up targets alone, metal clanging in the silence. Then she stayed. And shot. Not fast, not flashy. Just drilling the fundamentals her father had beaten into her bones. Grip, breath, follow through. Reset, do it again. Her shoulder bruised, her eyes blurred, and still she pressed on. She wasn't training for them, not to impress. She was training so that if the moment came again, she wouldn't flinch. Because somewhere deep inside, she knew it would. Moments like that always came back. And when it did, she couldn't afford to be the girl who just swept brass. She had to be ready. By the time the team rolled in that morning, SUVs grinding over gravel, Sarah had already fired more rounds than some of them would all day. She said nothing, just logged her shots, cleaned her station, and stepped back into the background. But they noticed. They always noticed. Jake watched her as he passed, sunglasses hiding his eyes. "Morning, Martinez." It was the first time he'd said it like she belonged there. She felt something shift quietly inside her. Like the world had tilted a fraction, not enough to knock her off balance, just enough to warn her. The ground beneath her old life was starting to move. And as she stood behind the line that afternoon, wind licking at her hair, the smell of gunpowder crawling under her skin, she realized something unsettling. She wasn't invisible anymore. And she wasn't sure she wanted to be. The wind had teeth that morning. It came screaming off the Pacific in low, guttural howls that bent the range flag sideways and stripped warmth from her bones. Sarah stood at the far edge of the observation platform, boots sunk into damp gravel, her red visitor badge tugged by the gusts. The SEALs were already setting up, silent and methodical, and she clutched her clipboard like it was armor. She told herself she didn't care, that she was just here to watch. But her pulse betrayed her. It hammered in her throat like a fist. It was evaluation week. Not just training assessment, real scenarios scored, watched. Even from this distance, she felt their tension humming through the air like static. Every movement was sharper. No wasted words. No second chances. She wasn't supposed to be here. But Jake had said nothing when she showed up, just flicked his eyes toward an open spot by the wall. An unspoken stay out of the way, but stay. And she was up first. He knelt behind the bench, rifle tucked deep into his shoulder, breath steady as stone. Sarah had to admit he'd changed. The wild, jittering eagerness was gone. His movements were measured now, deliberate. She watched him ride the recoil, recover, break again. Clean, smooth, precise. A flicker of pride caught her off guard. She buried it. Pride was dangerous here. Targets rang downrange. The spotter called his hits. Jake's only response was a small nod. Cleared his rifle and stepped back, silent. One by one, the others rotated through. Sarah tracked every shot in her notes, wind corrections, firing cadence, minute tremors in their grips. It wasn't judgment. It was survival. Watching was how she stayed invisible. But today, something was different. They weren't ignoring her anymore. Sometimes, when a shooter came off the line, his eyes would flick her way for half a second, as if to check her reaction. As if it mattered. She almost didn't notice the black sedan until it was too late. It rolled in slow, quiet on the gravel, windows reflecting the cold sun. Her stomach dropped. Commander Harrison. She recognized the severe posture even before the door opened. He was in navy dress blues, ribbons sharp against his chest, cap tucked under one arm. Two other officers followed, plus a civilian in a slate suit, trim, smug, and radiating the kind of confidence only expensive failure could buy. Jake stiffened as they approached. "Commander on deck," someone muttered under their breath. Harrison surveyed the field like a hawk. His gaze landed on Sarah briefly, sharp, assessing, then moved on. The civilian contractor set a hardshell case on the bench with theatrical care. He announced, "We're testing the Artemis Smart Optic today. Fully adaptive, real-time wind and drop calculation. It's going to change the game." Sarah's shoulders tensed. She hadn't spoken, but glanced at her like he could feel her skepticism radiating. The man popped the case and lifted a sleek black scope, all brushed titanium and arrogance. He mounted it to the black Talon rifle. Sarah's breath caught. The black Talon was almost sacred here, an instructor's weapon, battered and burnished by years of quiet excellence. She'd never seen anyone but Jake touch it. Jake said nothing. His jaw flexed once. The contractor grinned. "Let's see what this beauty can do. Moving target, 1,000 yards, crosswind, no problem." Sarah's eyes went to the range flags. Wind sheer, hard left to right. Mirage boiling off the dirt in shimmering waves. Not today, she thought. He settled behind the rifle. The optic glowed faintly with internal data. The target, a steel E-type silhouette, swung laterally on cables 1,000 yards out. The shot cracked wide. Dust kicked far to the right. Sarah winced. She called it before he pulled the trigger. The scope's computer didn't understand the layered crosswinds cutting through the canyon. He fired again, miss. Again, miss. Harrison's face hardened. "That's enough," he said flatly. But the contractor's pride was bleeding. "Scope just needs more data." "No," Harrison snapped. "We're done with demonstrations. This is a live, not a trade show." The man hesitated, then smirked. "Then let's have your range girl try." The air froze. Sarah's heart punched her ribs. Jake's head snapped toward the man. "That's enough." But the contractor leaned back, smug. "If she's as sharp as you all whisper, prove it. Otherwise, stop wasting my time." Harrison's eyes narrowed. The world held still. Then Jake's voice, quiet and deliberate. "Sir, with your permission, let her take one round." Sarah's ears roared. Harrison turned, looked at her for a long, surgical moment. "Are you willing?" Her voice was steady, though her hands felt numb. "Yes, sir." The black Talon was heavier than she expected. Not in pounds, in weight, history, reputation. The metal was from years of use, smooth where countless hands had worn it clean. She lay prone on the coarse mat, the smell of cordite and cold earth seeping into her skin. The smart optic blinked with green data. She ignored it. Wind, 911 cutting at a diagonal. Mirage heavy, distorting edges. Target speed moderate, left to right. She dialed the dope manually, like her father had taught her. Like Jake did when no one was watching. Her world narrowed. One breath, one beat. Breathe in. Half exhale. Pause. Trigger press. Crack. The sound came back a half-second later, a flat, metallic clang echoing across the canyon. The target rocked violently backward. Dead center. Silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Jake grinned, slow and bright, the first real smile she'd ever seen on his face. "That's my girl," he whispered. Harrison just stared at the target, then at her. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. He spoke finally, voice mild. "If you ever decide nursing isn't your path, I know people who'd train you." Sarah blinked. "I thank you, sir." He gave the faintest nod. "Carry on." Then he turned and walked away, the other officers falling in behind him, the contractor trailing silent and pale. When the convoy rolled off the gravel lot, the silence left behind was heavier than gunfire. Sarah sat up slowly. Her hands had gone bloodless from how hard she'd gripped the stock. She heard someone chuckle, low and approving. Jake just crouched beside her, elbows on his knees. "You good?" She nodded. Her breath came fast, too fast. She swallowed, throat tight. "I didn't want to miss." "You didn't," he said simply. And then quieter. "You didn't flinch." That night she stayed late. The sun sagged toward the horizon in slow bleeding strokes. The range was empty, the only sound the distant crash of waves and the soft creak of cooling metal. She sat on one of the benches, elbows on her knees, staring at her hands. They were calloused. Steady. The same hands that used to stack first aid kits and sweep brass buckets. She tried to remember the girl who had just wanted to stay invisible. She couldn't. Jake found her there. Walked up quiet, didn't sit, just stood with his hands in his pockets watching the surf. "You know," he said softly, "you didn't just outshoot a contractor today." Sarah glanced up. "What then?" "You outshot the part of you that thought you didn't belong here." She didn't answer. Couldn't. Because part of her knew he was right. And part of her was terrified of what that meant. The invitation came without ceremony. No signatures, no briefing, not even an official email. Just Jake, leaning against the gear bench late one night as the range lights buzzed overhead. "Evaluation cycle starts next week," he said. "Be here at 500. Sarah blinked, as an observer. His eyes didn't move from the rag he was dragging across his rifle bolt. "As a candidate." The word felt like a misfire in her skull. "I'm not military," she said carefully. "You're not nothing either," he replied, voice calm. "You've already done the work. Time to see if you can stand in it." She opened her mouth, closed it. "You can walk away," he added almost gently. "No shame in it." And then he left. Just like that. Like he'd dropped a live grenade in her chest and walked off before it went off. She didn't sleep the night before it started. Instead, she sat cross-legged on her apartment floor, gear bag open, packing and repacking in silence. Her father's voice tried to cut through. All his warnings about how the military swallows people whole, about how it strips softness out of you and leaves only the hard parts behind. But she remembered something else he'd said, years ago on a mountainside range when she was 12 and crying from exhaustion. "You don't get stronger when it's easy. You get stronger when you can't breathe and still make the shot." At 4:30 she zipped her bag, shouldered it, and walked out into the cold. The sky was still black when she reached the facility. A salt-heavy wind howled through the parking lot. The range was floodlit and humming with quiet tension. Seals moved like shadows, stripping rifles, loading mags, tightening straps. No chatter. No welcome. They didn't look at her. Which meant, she realized with a strange flicker of relief, they didn't doubt her anymore either. She was just another name on the roster now. Jake handed her a slate gray vest. Wear this, you'll be blue team for week. It was heavier than she expected. The Velcro rasped loud as she sealed it across her chest. She caught her reflection in the glass of the range office door, hair pulled back, eyes shadowed, vest sharp across her frame, and for a flicker of a moment she didn't recognize herself. The first drill broke her lungs. Timed positional shooting under fatigue. 50 push-ups. Sprint down range. Drop prone. Make 3 clean hits under 25 seconds. Her muscles screamed, her breath felt like glass in her throat, and her scope trembled from her heartbeat. Miss. Miss. Hit. Reset, the instructor barked. She clawed back to her feet, sprinted, collapsed again. Miss. Hit. Hit. Again. And again. By the 5th rotation, she wasn't sure where her body ended and the rifle began. She was just motion and breath and pain. On the 6th, something changed. Her mind went quiet. Her body stopped arguing. And then the shots began to land. One by one. Like stones falling into still water. She cleared the final run just under time, rolled onto her back on the gravel, chest heaving like a broken bellows. No one clapped. No one spoke. But when she staggered to her feet, passed her a water bottle without a word. It was the closest thing to respect she had ever tasted. The next days blurred into one continuous ache. Snap drills. Wind call scenarios. Blindfolded weapon breakdowns by touch alone. Timed transitions from rifle to sidearm. They stripped everything soft out of her, sleep, comfort, certainty, and left her standing in raw edges and willpower. Sometimes, in the deep dark between drills, she caught herself wondering who she was trying to prove this to. Jake, her father, herself. And then she'd remember that shot on the black talon, the silence afterward, the way the world had shifted under her feet, and she'd drag herself upright and do the next thing. Failure stopped scaring her. What scared her was the thought of becoming invisible again. On the 4th day, the storm hit. Rain came in sideways sheets off the ocean, soaking everything in minutes. The air turned to needles. The instructors grinned like wolves. Real ops don't cancel for weather, one barked. Mount up. Mud swallowed her boots. Her rifle felt twice as heavy soaked through. Her fingers were numb, her cheek weld slipping on the wet stock. Targets blurred behind rain streaks. She missed. Again. Again. The old voice rose in her skull, the one that whispered, "You don't belong here. You're pretending. They're going to see through you." Her vision tunneled. Her breath fractured. The rifle started to shake. Then a hand landed on her shoulder. Jake. He didn't say anything, just crouched, shielded her from the rain for one silent second. Then he pointed 2 fingers at her chest. Right here, he said, barely audible over the storm. She swallowed, closed her eyes, listened. Her pulse was hammering but steady. She locked onto it. Breathe. Exhale halfway. Pause. Press. Crack. Steel rang. She opened her eyes. Hid. The rain didn't stop. But the shaking did. That night she sat in the locker room alone, wrapped in a towel, hair dripping onto the tiles. Her arms were lead. Her body throbbed. Her phone buzzed. A message from her nursing class group chat. Exam pushed to Monday. Study session tonight. Bring notes. Her stomach knotted. That was supposed to be her life. Textbooks, quiet libraries, safe halls. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt like she was reading someone else's messages. She locked the phone and sat staring at the floor until the lights timed out and left her in darkness. By the final day, she was hollowed out. But there was a strange calm inside the hollow. They ran the last evaluation just after dawn. Long-range engagement. 12 targets from 400 to 1,000 yards. Time scored. She lay prone on the damp platform, cheek to the stock, the wind crawling across her skin. One breath. One heartbeat. One shot. Her world narrowed down to that rhythm. She didn't think about missing. Didn't think about proving anything. Just the sound of her pulse. The break of the shot. And the distant ring of steel. Like a bell calling her home. When the last target fell, the line went silent. Jake lowered the spotting scope. "Clean run," he said simply. No one clapped, but smiled just a flicker and gave her a single short nod as he passed. And that was enough. That evening, she stood alone on the cliff edge above the range as the sun bled out into the sea. The wind whipped her hair, tasted of salt and cordite. Her body ached from crown to toes. But inside, something had gone still. She thought about the girl she'd been weeks ago, the quiet one who swept brass, who stayed small because it was safer. She could barely remember her now, because this place had stripped her down to the hard truth underneath. She wasn't doing this to be seen. She was doing it so she could stand here, unseen or not, and know she belonged. She didn't know what came next. She didn't know if she'd ever wear a uniform. But as the wind howled off the black water and the stars began to crawl out over the horizon, Sarah knew one thing with quiet certainty. She wasn't invisible anymore. And she never would be again. The call came at 2:17. Her phone buzzed across the nightstand like a trapped insect, dragging her out of shallow, dreamless sleep. Unknown number. She almost let it go. But something in her bones told her not to. "Martinez," a voice said when she answered, calm, measured. It was Jake. "We need you on site now." She sat up, heartbeat spiking. "What's going on?" "Range emergency detail. Real world. You'll get briefed when you get here." A pause, then softer. "Bring your bag." The line went dead. The air outside was razor cold, the coastal fog heavy as wet cloth. Sarah drove half-blind through the black, fingers locked around the steering wheel, the road slipping away under her headlights like unspooling tape. Her brain felt caught between two worlds, half of it still trying to tell her this was impossible, the other already cataloging gear, wind charts, dope settings. She wasn't ready. She knew that. But the strange thing was, she didn't slow down. The base was floodlit, buzzing with movement. Men in gear jogged between trucks, radios crackled, the smell of diesel and wet metal filled the air. Jake stood by an armored Suburban, clipboard under one arm, vest already cinched tight. He didn't waste words. Local DEA tasking hit a compound in the hills, expected light resistance. It was. He glanced at her, eyes sharp behind the calm. They're pinned down, too wounded. Hellos grounded by weather were closest. Sarah's stomach turned cold. "You're going in." "We are," he said. Then he held out a vest, her size. She froze. "You want me with you?" "I want your eyes on glass," Jake said. "No one's asking you to kick doors, just overwatch, distance." "I'm not military, I know." His voice softened, almost gentle. "You don't need to be. You just need to be who you've already shown you are." Her heart was a drum. Her fingers felt numb. She thought about saying no. Thought about the nursing textbooks waiting on her kitchen table. But the word wouldn't come. She took the vest. They moved like ghosts. No headlights, no chatter. Just the low growl of engines clawing up the switchbacks into the black mountains. Sarah sat in the back, wedged between, and her gear bag braced between her knees. Her mouth was dry enough to crack. The ride felt like an eternity and a heartbeat all at once. At 3:52 they stopped. The smell of pine and cordite burned on the wind. Jake crouched over the hood with a topo map lit in red light. Compound in that saddle. Agents are cornered in the east building, second floor. 2 hostiles confirmed on the ridge behind them, rifles. He glanced at Sarah. That's you. She nodded because her body remembered how. Her mind was still trying to run. They hiked the last half-mile on foot, boots whispering over needles and rock. The world was moonless, black as ink. Sarah's breath rasped in her ears, too loud. She forced herself to match Jake's pace, to move like they moved, low, silent, weight forward. They reached the ridge at 4:20. Jake dropped prone behind a fallen log and pointed. There. Across the saddle, the compound crouched like a shadow. Faint gunfire crackled from inside. And behind it, on the rise of earth silhouetted against faint starlight, she saw them, 2 shapes. Watching, waiting. Her pulse thudded through her skull. She slid prone, unpacking the rifle with hands that felt like someone else. Bolt checked. Suppressor locked. Wind call 6 quartering from the right. Range 680 yards. She whispered it to herself. Wind, range, elevation, breath. Her body steadied, like flipping a hidden switch. Her father's voice again, you don't have to be fearless, you just have to be still. Crosshairs settled. Breath in. Half out. Pause. Crack. The first shape folded, collapsing soundlessly into the dark. The second froze. Turned. Started to run. Crack. Down. The ridge went still. The gunfire from the compound faltered. Jake's voice in her ear. Perfect. And then the world exploded. Automatic fire shredded the night, ripping from the tree line below. Rounds snapped through branches overhead. Sarah flinched flat, heart slamming. Contact front 30 meters, barked. Muzzles flashed below 3, maybe 4 shooters sweeping up the slope. Jake's voice calm, blue team hold the ridge, Martinez eyes front. Her scope blurred. Her hands trembled. She couldn't breathe. Crawled closer, voice low and sharp. Breathe, Martinez. You've got this, just like the line. Something inside her clicked. Like a gear locking into place. She dropped her cheek back to the stock. Crosshairs swept the darkness. Their muzzle flash. Crack. Flash gone. Another. Crack. Gone. The remaining 2 broke, fleeing downslope. Silence crashed in, sudden and absolute. Her ears rang. Her chest burned. Her whole body trembled. Jake's voice. Ridge clear. Grinned sideways at her. Told you, just like the line. By 4:56, the compound was secure. The wounded DEA agents were stabilized and loaded into the convoy. Sarah sat on a rock at the edge of the road, helmet off, hands slack in her lap. Her fingers were stiff and bloodless, still locked in phantom recoil. The first pale threads of dawn bled across the peaks. Jake crouched in front of her. You good? She tried to speak. Her voice broke. She nodded. He studied her for a long moment. Not everyone holds it together their first time under fire, he said softly. Most don't. I didn't feel like I was holding anything, she whispered. That's the trick, Jake said. You stop trying to hold, you just do. He straightened. Get some water, we roll in 10. The ride back blurred. Sarah watched the mountain slide past in fractured shards of sunrise, her mind silent and raw. She should have been terrified. She should have been shaken, broken open, running. But all she felt was quiet, like the world had narrowed down to one still, bright point inside her chest. She had walked into real gunfire and walked out whole. Something fundamental had shifted, something she couldn't name. All she knew was that she would never be the same girl who used to sweep brass in silence. Not anymore. Back at the range, the others peeled off, heading for the showers, for sleep, for whatever waited beyond the wire. Sarah sat alone on the tailgate of the gear truck, legs swinging, vest unfastened, hair damp with sweat. The ocean wind came cold and clean. The world smelled of salt and cordite. Her hands were still, perfectly still. The debrief room smelled like sweat, old coffee, and silence. Not the normal kind of silence, not the calm kind. This one was heavy, suspended. Sarah sat on the edge of a folding chair at the far corner of the table, vest unfastened, helmet dangling from one hand. Her clothes were still damp from fog and adrenaline. Across from her, the SEALs looked like statues carved from fatigue and restraint. Mud still streaked their boots. Their faces were blank, but their eyes weren't. Commander Harrison stood at the head of the table. Dress blues, posture sharp enough to cut glass. His gaze moved down the line, then stopped on her. "Casualty count," he said quietly. "Jake 0, 2 DEA wounded but stable, all hostiles neutralized. Sniper overwatch." Jake's eyes didn't leave Harrison. "Martinez." A muscle jumped in Harrison's jaw. His gaze swung back to her, and for a second the weight of it nearly crushed her. "You engaged," he said. Her throat was dry. "Yes, sir." "How many?" "4 confirmed, 2 on the ridge, 2 advancing on our position." The words felt foreign in her mouth. 4 human lives gone. She forced her hands to stay still. Harrison's face gave nothing. But when he spoke, his voice was almost too even. "You are not military. You are not sworn. You had no legal obligation to be there." "I know, sir." "And yet you fired." She hesitated. "Then they were about to kill your men." The silence cracked like old ice. Harrison's gaze stayed locked on hers a second longer, then flicked to Jake. "Document this as part of the op report. Civilian embedded observer acted in defense of personnel. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Jake said. "Good." Harrison turned to leave. But at the door he stopped. Without looking back, he said, "She doesn't go out again, not unless I sign off." Then he was gone. No one moved. No one spoke. Then exhaled softly, like someone releasing a held breath. Jake pushed back from the table. "Get cleaned up, all of you, debrief again at 1600. Chairs scraped, boots thudded. They filed out one by one, exhausted and silent. Sarah stayed seated. Her body wouldn't move. Jake paused by her shoulder. "You okay?" "I don't know," she whispered. He crouched so his eyes were level with hers. "You did everything right." "I still feel," she stopped, searched for words, "wrong." "That's normal," Jake said softly. "First time you pull a trigger on someone who's shooting back, you don't walk away the same. You're not supposed to." Her voice cracked. "I don't even know if I want to do this." "You don't have to decide that today." He stood, gave her shoulder a small squeeze. "Go home, sleep, don't think, just be." And then he left her there with the silence. Her apartment felt alien. Too clean, too still. The walls seemed closer than they used to be. She sat on the floor in her shower for 20 minutes, water running cold, helmet still on the counter where she dropped it. When she finally crawled into bed, her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Her body was exhausted. Her mind wouldn't shut off. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the men on the ridge, the sudden collapse, the way they went from alive to gone like flipping a switch. They had names. They had lives. And she had erased them from the world. Even if they'd been trying to kill her team. Even if it had been clean. It didn't feel clean. It felt like she had cut something out of herself and left it on that mountain. She didn't answer Jake's calls for 2 days. Didn't go to the range. Didn't go to class. She sat on the floor of her living room with her textbooks open and untouched, staring through them like glass. Her phone buzzed again on the third night. This time, just 3 words. Come shoot tomorrow. She almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, she drove out before sunrise. The range was empty when she got there. Coastal wind howled across the platforms. The air smelled of salt and old brass. She carried her rifle to the 500-yard line and dropped prone. Her hands were steady. Her heartbeat was. She stared through the scope until her eyes blurred. Then she started firing. Slow, mechanical. Deliberate. Breathe. Exhale halfway. Press. Reset. The clang of steel echoed across the cliffs. One after another. Each shot sharp as gilt. By the time the sun burned through the mist, her cheek was raw from the stock and her shoulder throbbed. But her heartbeat had finally gone quiet. And for the first time since the mission, she could breathe. Jake found her hours later, crouched on the line surrounded by neat brass halos. He didn't speak at first. Just stood, hands in his pockets, watching her reload. Finally, you ghosted. I know, she said quietly. You don't get to disappear after something like that. I wasn't disappearing. She locked a mag into place. I was trying to remember who I am. And she stared downrange. I don't know yet. Jake crouched. You did what you had to do, what you were trained to do, what we were trained to do. She met his eyes. I'm not sure I want to be what you are. Jake didn't flinch. Then be something else, but don't pretend you're still who you were before that night. Her throat tightened. Because I'm not. Exactly, he said. Own it or it'll own you. That night, Sarah sat on her balcony with her nursing notes in her lap, untouched again. The city lights shimmered below like scattered stars. She used to want this life, simple, steady, safe. Healing people, fixing things. Now she wasn't sure if she still could. Or if she still should. Every time she blinked, she saw crosshairs. Saw the sharp arc of recoil. Felt the strange stillness that had overtaken her when it mattered. That stillness had saved lives. But it had cost her something she hadn't named yet. She didn't know if she could get it back. She didn't even know if she wanted to. Her phone buzzed again. This time. Range 600, quiet day, just us. She stared at the message. Then typed. Okay. The next morning, the ocean fog was thick as wool. Was waiting with a thermos of black coffee and 2 rifles. No words. No drills. Just quiet. They shot slow, side by side, fog swallowing the targets. After the 3rd string, spoke without looking at her. The first time changes you, he said. It's supposed to, otherwise you're not human. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. How long until it stops feeling heavy? It never does, said. You just get stronger under it, or you break. He chambered another round. Most people break. Sarah stared through her scope at the pale blur of the target. She didn't know which she would be. She only knew she wasn't broken. Not yet. The summons came on a Thursday. Plain envelope, no markings. It was slid under her apartment door sometime before dawn, quiet as a shadow. Inside, Report 900 Harrison. No rank, no title, just her name. She almost didn't go. She sat on her bed for a long time with the paper crushed in her hand, staring at the wall like it might answer for her. Her textbooks were open on the desk, pharmacology notes highlighted in desperate colors. The nursing boards were 8 weeks away. This wasn't supposed to be her life. Guns and gravel and wind calls weren't supposed to matter. And yet, her gear bag was already packed. At 8:30, she was driving down the coast with the ocean bleeding silver light through the fog, the letter folded in her pocket like contraband. Commander Harrison's office was clean and cold, like a scalpel. The walls were bare except for a single framed photo of a distant desert skyline, sun bleeding out behind sand hills. He didn't stand when she entered. Just said sit. Sarah sat. Her palms left damp prints on her jeans. Harrison studied her like a specimen. "You've been on my radar," he said finally. "You weren't supposed to be, but here we are." Her voice came out thin. "I didn't ask to." "You didn't," he cut in. "And that's the only reason you're still here." She blinked. "Most people who stumble into this world," Harrison said, "burn up trying to prove they belong. You didn't, you just showed up, quiet, precise, relentless." Sarah said nothing. She couldn't. Harrison folded his hands. "There's a program," he said. "Civilian Specialist Track, contract-based, advanced marksmanship and field support, extremely selective." Her chest went tight. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you'd qualify, if you wanted it." Her mouth went dry. "You want me to join?" "I'm offering you the chance to try," Harrison said. "You train officially, work alongside operational teams, real missions, real risk." Her heartbeat spiked. "But," Harrison said, and the word hit like a blade, "it's full immersion, no halfway, no weekends and part-time shifts. You walk through this door, the life you had before closes behind you." Her stomach turned. "Nursing school." "Gone," Harrison said. "You could go back someday, but it won't be the same. You won't be the same." He let the silence hang like a weight. Then, "You have 48 hours, decide." She didn't remember leaving his office. One moment she was sitting there drowning in his words. The next she was standing in the parking lot staring at her keys like they were foreign. The ocean wind was sharp and clean. It didn't clear her head. She drove aimlessly past the cliffs, past the range, past the diner where she used to work late shifts. Her phone buzzed with reminders from her study group. Lab quiz tomorrow. Boards review Monday. Her throat tightened. Her whole body felt split down the center. One side wanted the quiet safety of that old life. The other couldn't stop hearing the crack of her rifle in the mountains. Couldn't stop remembering how it felt to matter. That night she called her father. It went to voicemail. She hung up, then called again. This time he answered. His voice was gravel and warmth and exhaustion. "Sarah, everything okay?" She almost said yes. Instead, "Dad, if you could go back, would you still join?" Silence. Then, "I don't know," he said honestly. "It gave me everything, and it took everything." Her chest tightened. "You were proud, though." "I was good," he said. Pride came later, after the cost. Sarah stared at the floor. "I don't want to lose who I am." "Then whatever you do," he said softly, "do it with both feet in. Halfway will break you." And then he let her go. She didn't sleep. She sat on the balcony wrapped in a blanket, city lights winking like stars in a dark sea. She thought about her classmates, safe in their dorms, studying bones and blood and cures. She thought about the ridge, about wind crawling across her face, about the silence when her shot hit center. She thought about how she had felt, not safe, not fearless, but true. And she wondered if she could ever feel that way behind a hospital desk. If she could sit still knowing she had walked through fire and survived, knowing she was meant for something sharper. And if she turned away now, would that part of her go quiet again? Or would it die? She went to the range before dawn. The world was slate gray and silent. She shot alone, the echoes rolling back from the cliffs like distant thunder. Each shot came clean and perfect, carving holes through the fog. Her cheekbone ached from the stock. Her shoulder burned. She didn't stop. Couldn't. Because somewhere deep inside, she already knew what she was going to do. And it terrified her. At 8:59, she walked into Harrison's office. He didn't look surprised. "Yes or no," he said. Sarah's voice didn't shake. "Yes." Harrison nodded once, sharp. "Report Monday, 400, don't be late." She stood there for a second that felt like falling. Then she turned and left, the door clicking shut behind her like a lock. Her old life closing. Her new one waiting. She drove straight to the cliffs above the range. The ocean wind tore at her hair, cold and wild. She sat on the hood of her car, legs dangling, staring at the waves tearing themselves apart on the rocks below. Her heart was calm. Her hands were steady. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was standing between two worlds anymore. She felt like she had stepped fully into one. They broke her on the second week. Not with yelling, not with punishment. With silence. That was the worst part of the civilian specialist course, the way they erased everything soft, not with noise but with nothing at all. No praise. No feedback. Just drills until her arms shook and her breath came in shredded gasps, then more drills when she failed them. Wind call assessments at dawn, gear maintenance at midnight. Timed field scenarios with no hint of whether she'd passed or failed. She'd never felt so invisible or so watched. Her body hardened first. The bruises became background noise, her muscles carving themselves sharper each day. Then her mind began to fracture. She stopped dreaming. Stopped thinking about who she'd been before. There was no before anymore. Just steel, breath, and the quiet weight of expectation pressing down on her like a hand. Sometimes she caught herself longing for her old life, warm coffee, textbooks, laughter. But whenever she imagined going back, it felt like trying to crawl into a skin she'd already shed. By the third week, they began tearing her down on purpose. Paired drills. Public evaluations. Failures displayed like open wounds. Miss the crosswind, reset. Too slow on the reload, reset. Your hands are shaking, Martinez, reset. She stopped arguing. Stopped explaining. Reset. Again. Again. Until the pieces of her felt like sand. She was certain she'd reached her edge. But then somehow she stepped past it. The moment came at 3:42 on a rain-lashed Thursday. The instructors staged a night field course, 20 silhouettes scattered across the canyon, each tagged with faint IR strobes invisible to the naked eye. The wind howled like broken glass. Rain clawed at her face. Jake crouched beside her in the dark, his voice low. "This is it, final, full-timed. If you finish clean, you're in." Sarah's hands were already steady. She didn't even know when that had happened. The timer chirped. She moved. She flowed across the terrain like water, mud clutching at her boots, rain streaming off her hood. Each shot cracked clean, echoes rolling away into the black. Targets dropped like falling stars. Her mind was silent. Her body was the rifle, the wind, the breath. No fear. No noise. Just stillness. The final target fell at 23 minutes, 17 seconds. She cleared her weapon, locked it open, and stood in the floodlights as the rain hammered down. Jake's voice crackled over the comms. "Clean run." She didn't smile. She just breathed. For the first time, she wasn't trying to survive this world. She was part of it. The next morning, they gathered on the range platform in full kit as the sun burned the fog off the cliffs. Commander Harrison stood in front of them, hands behind his back. His gaze swept the line and stopped on her. "Martinez," he said. "Step forward." Her boots felt anchored to the earth. But she moved. Harrison studied her for a long, surgical moment. "You started as a range clerk," he said. "Then an observer, then an anomaly. Now you've earned your place." He held out a patch subdued gray, the trident stitched in black thread. Not official, not ceremonial, but everyone knew what it meant. Sarah took it with both hands. Not trembling, not smiling, just still. Harrison gave a single sharp nod. "Welcome to the program." That night she walked the cliffs alone. The sea roared below, black and endless. The stars were sharp as shrapnel in the sky. Her body ached in deep, quiet ways. Her hands were calloused. Her shoulders carried weight that would never come off. But her mind was clear. She thought of her father, his quiet pride, his warning about cost. He had been right. She had lost the girl who once hid in the background, stacking brass and dreaming small. She wasn't her anymore. She didn't miss her. Because what had grown in her place was stronger. Quieter. Truer. She drove home with the window down, the cold wind slicing across her face like a baptism. Her old nursing textbooks were still on the desk. She didn't touch them. Didn't pack them. Didn't throw them away. She just set the gray patch on top of them. A marker. A fault line between lives. The next morning, she clipped the patch to her rifle bag. Walked down the gravel path toward the range as sunlight spilled across the cliffs. No fanfare. No music. Just the slow scrape of her boots on stone. She passed the benches, the brass buckets, the silhouettes waiting downrange. The same place she had once swept invisible. Now the shooters paused when she passed. Just for a second. Just enough. And she knew. She belonged. Not because of her name. Not because they let her. Because she had made herself impossible to ignore. She settled prone, the stock warm against her shoulder, the wind whispering across her cheek. Breath in. Half out. Pause. Crack. Steel rang downrange like a bell. She smiled, faint and quiet, and whispered to herself. Not my father's shadow anymore. Then she worked the bolt, chambered the next round. And the world narrowed to stillness. Because sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.